The best way to talk about classes and objects is by looking at a specific example. So in this lesson, we're going to begin building a name class to keep track of a person's name, which will include the first name, the middle name, and the last name. So let's get started. Open a DOS window, navigate to your Documents Java folder, and then let's work with the template file. So if you saved a template file, open that up by typing Notepad in the name of your template file. Mine is called template.txt. What I want to do here is change public class template to public class chapter 5. Everything else can stay the same, and then we're going to do a file save as. Remember, our file name has to be the same as our class name, so it's chapter5.java. Be sure to go to Save as Type and change that to All Files and click Save. And now we're ready to begin. A class definition begins in the section above public static void main. In other words, before, or it could be after, the main program. So put a line between the opening curly brace for chapter 5 class and public static void main, and then indent and write public class name, like so. Drop down to the next line and put a opening curly brace to signify the beginning of the class definition. Skip down to the next line, indent, and again, indentation is important to make our programs more readable. When we define a class, we define two parts, the data part and the behavior part, which we're going to call methods, starting in this lesson. We'll begin with the data. A name consists of three parts, a first name, a middle name, and a last name. We're going to declare variables for those parts right now. Private string first for my first name. I'll explain what private means in just a moment. Private string middle for the middle name, and private string last for the last name. When we declare a variable as private, we're saying that the exposure of the variable is only within the definition of the class and not to any other part of any other program. I can't really explain much more than that until we can actually create an object from this class. So for now, just take my word for it that we want first, middle, and last to be private variables. And I'll explain more about what that means later. After your variables, then you can create methods or behaviors. For a name, that might include something like displaying the name or displaying the initials. So I'm going to demonstrate those two methods now, and we'll perhaps look at others later. Methods are public, so we'll declare those as public. We'll do display first. A method always begins with the return type of the method. In other words, a method returns data. So if I'm going to create a method called display name, it's going to return a string, and that string will be the name in the object that we're working with. So we write public and then string for the return data type and then the name of the method. So I'm calling this method display name. We use the same rules for methods as we use for variables. Then I'm going to put a open and close parentheses after that. That signifies that I'm not providing any data to this method. Think of a method like a function. A function can have data that you're going to manipulate and return as something else. For example, when you double a number or when you compute the absolute value of a number. In this case, we don't have any data, so we're just going to put open and close parentheses because we want to display the name. Put an open curly brace to signify the beginning of the definition of the method. Indent, and then write the keyword return. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then write first, the plus sign, a space, which is an open quote, space, close quote, another plus sign, the middle name, another plus sign, another space, and then the last, or the last name, the variable last. Type a closing curly brace to signify that the definition is over, and we've defined our first method, display name. Return just tells the compiler to return whatever expression follows that. The expression is a concatenation of the first name plus a space plus the middle name plus a space plus the last name. So it's first, space, middle, space, last, space. Then we close off with a closing curly brace. Let's write one more just for the practice of it. We'll write public string get initials. And again, we don't pass any data to this. We just have open and close parentheses. An open curly brace, indent, and then type return first dot substring 01. I'll explain that in just a minute. Plus middle dot substring 01. And then just to make this easy to read, drop down to the last line, type a plus. It doesn't have to be right under the F. I'm just putting it there. Plus last dot substring 01. Semicolon to signify the end of the statement, and a closed curly brace. Substring is a string method built in that returns a substring from a string. The arguments, or the data that we pass in, the first one is the starting position, where we want to pull the substring from. The second argument is the number of characters we want to pull in the substring, or from the original string. I want to get the first letter of the first name, so I write substring 0, 1. I want to get the first letter of the middle name, so again I write substring 0, 1. And then because I also want to get the first letter of the last name, I also write substring 0, 1. We're finished with our class definition at this point, so I have to type another closing curly brace to signify the end of the class. And then I'll put a space between them. We're still not quite ready to create an object of this class. We're going to save that for another couple of lessons away. But let me review what we've done in this lesson. We're creating a class called name. This class will store a person's full name, their first, middle, and last name. We created 3 variables, also called members. Later in the course, we will break down this terminology in much more detail. So sometimes I will call these variables, and sometimes I'll call them members or even fields. One thing you're going to learn about object-oriented programming is there's lots of terminology, and a lot of it is not consistent. So we have 3 members or fields. I'll try to use the object-oriented terms. They're private because we do not want them to be exposed to any other parts of the program other than the class definition. And again, I'll explain that in more detail once we can actually create objects of this class. And they're all 3 strings, so we use the string data type. Then I created 2 methods, which are just operations that we can perform on the data in the class. The first one is called display name. It returns a string, which is a concatenation of the first name, the middle name, and the last name, with the space in between each. And I just chose that arbitrarily. I could have picked last name, comma, first, middle, or some other configuration. I just chose to make it simple by making first space, middle space, and last space. And then the second method I created is getInitials, and it returns a string that consists of the first letter of the first name, the first letter of the middle name, and the first letter of the last name. And I got those letters by calling a string method that's built in called substring, which pulls a given number of characters from a given position in the string. So 01 says pull 1 character from the 0 position of the string. I should also mention that in Java, strings are numbered, their positions, starting at 0. So the first position of a string is always position 0. That's why this first argument is 0. As I mentioned before, we're still not ready to build objects or create objects of this class. We still need to learn how to create one more type of method called a constructor. And we're going to look at how to create constructors in the next lesson.